Hey, this is Soma79 with a special announcement. My new Mega Mix is up. My MF Doom Mega Mix Oxidation Moons Day is now available. Go to www.soma79.com/doom to check it out. It's a 30-minute mix that I did of MF Doom raps over my own beats. I really enjoy it. I hope you really enjoy it. So check it out. Tell a friend. Peace. Hey, welcome to the newest episode of the Articulate Ox podcast. I am your host, Soma79. Thank you so much for joining me today. My guest today is fellow Tim Lapetino. Tim helped write a book on Pac-Man this year, and it is a huge book. I have it over here. Let me see if I can lift it. Yeah. Here we go. I love this book. It's several hundred pages, tons of beautiful pictures, like this one. But this book is about the history of Pac-Man, and I loved getting it into with him. As you can tell, as you've watched the episodes before, I love Pac-Man. It's probably my favorite video game of all time. And it was so great talking to somebody as passionate about this as me, even more so. And he tells a great story about how he came about having his own Tron, Discs of Tron game in his house, his own stand-up arcade game, and I was super envious of that. But Tim has done a lot of very, very cool things. He made this book called Art of Atari a few years back, and for anybody that has as well-aged as me, who grew up with the Atari 2600, you know the art of it was a really big part of it, and it really took these very basic images and really helped pull more out of your imagination to finish the game in your own head. And it was a really fun conversation with Tim, and I'm glad there's people like him out there doing what they can to help save the history of things like Pac-Man. So thank you very much, Tim. Check out his Instagram, and just give a Google for him. You're gonna find a lot of cool stuff. As for me, Oxidation Moons Day, my MF Doom mix, 30 minutes of MF Doom raps over Soma79 beats is available now. Just go to soma79.com/doom and you can find it there. And also, my new EP with Pillsy Beats is coming out soon. Quiet Life, Loud Friends. It is featuring Copyright, Honest, Jay Sinatra, my man Rick Seaholm, all types of awesome stuff. I cannot wait to share this with you. Maybe you already have. I don't know when this is coming out. We just do these things and they get released when they get released. So, all right. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you already enjoyed it. Hope you did enjoy it. Hope you're going to enjoy it. Hope all of this stuff. Thank you very much, Tim Lapetino. Moth out. Moth out. Peace.
And with wings clipped, quick to flip manuscripts, cause her man went from damaged kid to damn he's rich. But she still can't stand the way he manages to never put nickels in the can for the cancer kids. Plus he cheats at cornhole and brags that he won.
Welcome to the newest episode of the Articulate Ox podcast. I am your host, Soma79. I am so excited for my guest today, Tim Lapetino, who is the co-author of Pac-Man, Birth of an Icon. This book, it started popping up in my my ads, and I tried to resist it. I was like, nope. There was the deluxe version, and now I wish I got. But I love this book. Feels like it was written for me. There's so many. I opened up to the least interesting page, but there's so many awesome drawings and the story of Pac-Man. And I'm just rambling already. Tim, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for making this book happen.
No, it's my pleasure. Yeah, it was very much, that book really, like almost everything I do. It came out of a real love for Pac-Man, but also just a real interest about why is it that we're still talking about Pac-Man 40 years later, right? Not just that it's this game that's easy to pick up and anybody can play it and it sort of has a universal appeal, but also just the character and the property as a whole. Why has it persisted when things like Missile Command or Defender have not, right?
Right.
And I think that was one of my real interests and sort of a question that drove me to write some of the history about of it.
It was interesting too, because you get in the book about how this is something I might have known and forgotten, but the Pac-Man cartoon was one of the first Saturday morning cartoons ever, if not like the first, in the era of of like the laws changing and them being able to be a little more commercial about it. I think that was the first one
Yes.
out the gate. Perfect timing.
No, it's a huge. I mean, it's funny because you're like, oh, there's going to be politics in a history book about video games,
Yeah.
but Reagan's deregulation of TV and kids programming was gigantic and opened the door for all sorts of things, everything from you know uh, Masters of the Universe to GI Joe to all these things where that would have never flown in the 70s. Now the 80s was this time where it was ripe for all these companies to go ahead and take this IP that they call it now and turn it into animated shows aimed at kids.
Yeah, I mean, it started the era you mentioned, Masters of the Universe. That I believe was a toy line that then got turned into either I think a comic book and then maybe the cartoon and then that wonderful movie that I just saw for the first time recently. There's this podcast, How Did This Get Made? And they cover like bad movies. And during the quarantine, I aim to watch every one of them. And there's only three left that I haven't seen of like the 300 plus. So
Yeah,
hey,
no,
that was one
I
of
know
them.
the podcast. That movie's so interesting, and there's a whole backstory. Even, I mean, it's probably beyond the scope of this, but I think it's very interesting because the company Canon Films that
Yes.
made that movie, that they have an unbelievably insane story as well. Like, there's
There's
a
a
whole
great documentary
documentary.
about them. I think it's Electric Boogaloo, right? Is that what it's
Yep,
called?
yep.
Yep.
That's one of my favorite documentaries of all
Amazing.
time. It's so great. So it's worth a watch, and it puts Master Universe in a different light, which I think is worthwhile.
Yes, yes. And it's a fun movie compared to a lot of those kind of bad movies like that. And I'll also take Double Dragon. I'd never seen that before. How Did This Get Made me. I was all in. Like I've always been all in on Alyssa Milano, so that helped. But like her outfit in that movie is legendary. I could just, write a sonnet to it. It's amazing. Um so it's funny. I pulled up your website, and I'm sort of overwhelmed by the amount of awesome IP that I see staring back at me. We got Tower Records. I've given them a lot of money. Pac-Man, giving them a lot of money. Spider-Man, Captain America, Art of Atari. Like you have done it all.
I try to stay busy, but for me, my background, I have a journalism background, but then I also, I'm a designer and creative director, so I do both those things, and I've sort of toggled on and off those, over the last couple decades. But it really wasn't until, I was really a corporate designer, designing logos and packaging for, food brands and business to business companies, and all the normal stuff that if you work at a design firm, that's typically what you do. And it really wasn't until Art of Atari, when I, wrote that book and had that published, that really opened the door for me to sort of take all the geeky interests that I have, toys, video games, animation, movies, all those things to really sort of actually work in that world, right? So I've gotten a chance to do, package design for toy companies like Super 7
Super
and
Seven's amazing. I got a bunch of Super Seven Zarface stuff up there. They are the best.
that's awesome. Yeah, no, they're great. They're a great group, and I, really like working with them. And that's really fun. I've gotten to work on things like Gem and Pee Wee Herman, and
R.I.P.
all the Transformers, GI Joe, all that kind of stuff, and that's really really fun. And I bring something extra to it because, it's the stuff that I grew up with, but also, it's just really fun to work in that world. And so the last 3 years, I was the head of design and creative director at a company called MobiFox, and we made watch bands and digital watch faces for all sorts of these brands. So I mean, it was sort of like a who's who of nerdy pop culture brands. Everything from Marvel and DC to Stranger Things and Hello Kitty and Barbie and all these big stalwart geeky brands, and that's been really fun because it feels like okay, now the stuff that we grew up with, it's sort of seeing, there's another cycle of it all coming through, and it's not just marketing to, 40-year-olds. It really is,
Right.
it really is something that, other generations are discovering things like Barbie. So it's just fun to be able to be at the wheel and sort of be part of that.
I sense that you and I are probably about the same age. I was born in 79, so I was a child through the 80s. And like I remember, I must have spent I don't know how long trying to find like a Snake Eyes action figure. And I never actually got one because my local toy stores didn't carry that. And I was like,
Mhm.
someone somewhere must have these. But that was it. It was like there wasn't like you go online and go, I want 96 different Snake Eyes and I'm gonna customize it
Right.
anyway. It's like we come from like, this is some real like first world problems, but we come from like the secret wars Marvel toy thing was everything to me, and then it was like He-Man was everything, and like Star Wars figures, but there wasn't really much else, like
Right.
you know
Well, and you got what you got. You found what you found, and oh, I got this as a present from my aunt or whatever it is, and or I traded with the kid down the block. The idea that
yeah.
as long as you have money, you could get you could get whatever your heart's desire at this point. I mean, it's sort of this crazy wonderland where it was just like, I had a Snake Eyes, and I had like an original Snake Eyes. I don't even know, I don't know if we got it or I traded with a friend, but this is an infamous story in my family. My brothers and I were playing out in the yard, and we decided we would play a great game where we would take turn burying a figure, you know, in the ground, like under the wood chips and things like that. And then if you walked around, you'd be like, "Oh, you're so hot, you're so cold," and then find it. Well, my two brothers buried Snake Eyes. They couldn't remember where they buried him.
Still out there somewhere.
He's still at my parents' house somewhere,
Still on a mission.
Yeah, and so of course, every time I see one at like a toy show or something, I took a picture of one. I'm like, "Hey guys, $100, you could get my Snake Eyes back,"
Yeah, it is
and
funny. It's
that,
like you end up with a few of those. I have obviously have a bunch of my figures on the wall. Like I told my girlfriend, I'm like, if something happens to me, one in every 20 of these is actually worth something. But I don't know how you're gonna figure out which one it is. It is.
take detailed notes.
Yeah. Well, that's her problem. So it's funny. Like it was even the same thing with Atari games. So I have a few little Pac-Man things I'll show here. This one, obviously, a lot of people had this, the original Pac-Man cartridge. I believe this was not a very well received Pac-Man game. I was too young to know better, but I believe this wasn't I thought it was a very good port. And I think a lot of people got the screen burned into their television because it was the pre-screensaver days, if I remember that correctly. I don't know, I might have made
Yeah,
that
yeah,
up.
and they tried to deal with that by cycling the colors when like you were not playing, like it would
Yeah.
change. But it's funny. It's like yes and no. Like that, I think that game and the ET game, even for Atari, have sort of gotten somewhat unfair reputations.
Yeah.
Where I think with Pac-Man, yes, it was not the arcade game, but it never was going to be, right? Or at least in the time, like the idea that what everybody wanted was the exact arcade game and try and keep it as close to the arcade. That wasn't, ports from arcade to home console were still so new. And I don't think it was I don't think it was clear at the time to definitely not to Atari, but not to everybody that like the idea was that it had to be the exact same thing. It was going to be different. The Pac-Man screen in the arcade is vertical. The other one's a little more horizontal. Like Todd Fry, who I interviewed, he's caught, he was the programmer for the 2600 version of Pac-Man, and he's caught a lot of crap for it, over the years. But I think a lot of that is sort of internet Monday morning quarterbacking, saying, "Oh, it was so terrible." I mean, it sold millions and millions and millions of
Right.
copies, and I think it might still be the best-selling Atari 2600 game. I mean, it made lots of money.
Yeah.
Now, did it hurt, Atari's reputation because it wasn't as good as the arcade game? Maybe, but I think it forgets this idea, it sort of assumes a lot of cultural knowledge that that you would do this the way they did it in the early 80s, that we would do it now, where you're like, I want a pixel by pixel remake.
Right.
So it was one of the things that I dug into with Todd. We've talked at a couple different points, but it's one of the things that in the Pac-Man book I interviewed Todd, and we talked about that, and how does he feel about the reception of that. I mean, but also he felt good about it because it was an incredible selling game, and he got
Yeah.
royalties on it, and it made him a millionaire.
It's a miracle it
Um,
even exists. I mean, it's
yeah.
like it's pretty impressive that it's even there. So sorry, Todd, I didn't mean to throw any shade at you. It's funny you
Well,
mentioned the
and
ET
we
game. It's
played
like,
the heck out of it. I think
yeah,
that's the other thing is it's not like we were like, oh, this is such garbage that we're throwing. I mean, man, I bonk 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 bonk.
right.
I mean, like I played the heck out of that as a kid, and so
And
did
this thing
some of
has
my
the memory
brothers.
capabilities of like half an MP3. That's something to keep in mind too.
Right,
It's like
right.
you can't put anything on. It's like a
Yeah.
miracle this does anything.
No, and
Yeah.
it's not the same hardware. It's not even as powerful hardware as what was running in a Pac-Man arcade machine. So it's a little bit apples and oranges. I mean, it's a huge case of Monday morning quarterbacking in a lot of ways. So you got to sort of take it on its own merits. And is it a fun game? Is it a Pac-Man-esque game? Yes, it's different than the arcade machine, but that's not bad.
Right. And as a kid, like even you mentioned the ET game, like I don't remember thinking that was a bad game. It was frustrating to get out of that pit all the time. But I would say that the Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark game, that was a level of frustration that I swear gave me PTSD. I should not have had to deal with that game as a kindergartner. Like that mess that game was so confusing.
Yeah, well, and it's sort of inscrutable, whereas I feel like ET maybe, hey, you could have polished it a little bit because he
Right.
only had a
Like 2
handful of weeks.
weeks. Like,
I think he had like 6 weeks to do it in total, but I mean that's still insane
yeah.
for games normally take 6 months. But
Yeah.
I mean it's still kind of an amazing game if you understand it. I mean I read the instructions when I was a kid. It was a game that we were actually able to win.
Yeah, I
So
think
I
I beat
mean,
that one. Yeah.
well, yeah, I loved that game. I thought it was really fun. So it doesn't deserve all the crap I think that it gets.
I can still hear the sound of VT walking though, as we were talking about it. I could literally still hear they're so buried into my brain. It's unbelievable. Yeah, yeah. I
Right.
mean, I think Atari did make the mistake. I believe I heard this might not be true, and I might have read it. I don't know if it was the ET or the Pac-Man game that they might have made more copies of the game than there were 2,600 consoles in existence, which is a way to do things, I guess.
Well, I think the thought was that this would sell more consoles. It would be another killer app in the way that Space Invaders was for the 2600. But I mean that game sold incredibly well as well. I mean, I think it was different than what people are expecting, and maybe the lesson is, if you're going to go big on that, maybe you do make something that's more conventional because it's actually a pretty groundbreaking adventure game. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
a lot of scrolling.
complicated,
Yeah,
it's different. I mean, you're finding all these pieces and you're assembling. There's many ways to win. It's not just straight up, Atari, ET's trying to shoot the bad guys with, Reese's Pieces or something like that would have
yeah.
been a very conventional way to do it. And
Right. Like that
Howard
crappy Back to the
Warshaw.
Future game where you're just throwing milkshakes at people, the one that the NHS. I'm like, what? Like, yeah, that's what we're looking for. But the ET
Right.
game, it actually looked like ET. I mean, as well as you could. But I mean, one of the things too that about regarding this is some of the charm I think is lost. I mean, that's inevitable based on just what you're doing. But like, I don't think the Monday morning quarterbacking part. I don't think people realize how important charm was, because I think if it
Sure.
was, this drawing would probably be a little more like what's on the cover of this book, and how important that stuff is, that it's like there is really like a secret sauce to most of these super successful games, that once you change a few things, it's a tightrope that's pretty easy to fall off of.
Well, and I think it's so interesting because I think that brings us back to today. Say we're going to make a new Pac-Man game. Bandai Namco will come to us and say, "This is how Pac-Man looks. This is how the game works. This is how it has to be." And any brand that you're licensing the name or the likeness from is going to be that way. They have a playbook, they have a brand book, they have very strict rules because they're protecting their intellectual property. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, it was the Wild West. It was very different. Whereas that's why Pac-Man looks differently because Atari was allowed to create their own look for Pac-Man. And I go into this again, both in the Pac-Man book and in Art of Atari, talking about the versions of Pac-Man that Atari came up with visually, because there wasn't an idea that like let's make it exactly like the game. So Atari wanted their version of Pac-Man to distinguish it from the other things, right? So they had their own art, which I think is great. I mean, it's really interesting art. It's a fresh take on it, and you've got all these weird different versions of Pac-Man out there
Yeah,
because licensing and all that was not the same.
it's funny you mentioned that, because I have this record right here, and you'll notice. So up here, this is like trying to look at the back of my head with two mirrors, but this is really the original one. This was the Japanese Pac-Man drawing, wasn't it? With the feet and the red eyes.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that is seen alongside here with a different Pac-Man that obviously recognize him as Pac-Man, but isn't in any way, probably not the first thing we think of. And then we have the more traditional one in the font, and this wolf that we've never seen again. And on the back, you see, a Miss Pac-Man and Baby Pac-Man. It doesn't really match up either. But I mean, we have on this one record, like, in the moon's also a Pac-Man. that's trying
Right.
to eat the ghost and Pac-Man. It's like,
Well, and it's even more complicated than that because you've got the Pac-Man logo there, but then that one with the red eyes,
yeah.
that actually came from, that's not Japanese. That's actually the Midway version.
Oh yes,
And
that's what it is.
and that was on the side art, which is it's not Japanese. It's not, it's not the later version. It is their own version, and I won't spoil this because it's in the book, and it was one of the big sort of reveals from me, is I wanted to find out who did that art, and I think we figured it out. But then
Yeah.
you see the rest of that art that you've got. Pat McMahon was a Midway artist, and he did those record covers, and he did the art that's on the record, and that's done in a totally different style. That's sort of an homage to the early Disney cartoons and Tex Avery and that kind of stuff. So there wasn't an idea that like, oh, all this stuff has to move in synergy. And as weird as it is to today, I actually really like that. And I think it's fun because you get to see all these different artists take on it. It's like the IP becomes this sort of interesting, flexible thing. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do a Pac-Man book, is because there was a really interesting look at what became this huge pop culture thing. Instead of just being like, hey, you know what, we're going to license Pac-Man for some T-shirts. I mean, Midway
There
was
was a
just really
picture in
happy.
there's a picture in the book where there's the entire room. It's like a catalog shot, and it's like I was like I had a lot of that stuff. I had the board game. Wish I still had that. There was definitely like a comforter or a pillowcase in my house. Like I had so much of that stuff. It was just, and it's crazy too because it's just a little chompy guy getting pills. Like our like we filled in so much of the backstory and created this richer world out of it. It's pretty, it's a story that you wouldn't expect it to be able to fill up essentially a textbook here. This thing could hurt you if you're going to carry around. But like there's a real story here that's like, to your point about even the Reagan administration, there's, it ties into the development of the world of pop culture. It's crazy. Donkey Kong
Well,
hasn't done this much, though we did
right. I
give
mean,
us Mario. So
it came at an interesting time where, like I think that they were thinking about making money rather than, oh, you know what, we really need to. I mean, there's a term in licensing today, they call it logo slapping. Like, you got a product and you just want to put a logo on it.
yeah,
And that's
the
great,
old Krusty the
and
Clown thing, Krusty the Clown
right.
pregnancy tests.
Right. But with Pac-Man, like you said, like all those different iterations of Pac-Man on the watch, Pac-Man on the record, like, it sort of served to broaden it. It was world building at a time when world building was not considered important, right? The plots to the cartoon, or the record, the songs on that record that you're holding, like those are not like canonical Pac-Man. I mean, it's all kinds of weird stuff
Yeah,
going on there, and it's kind of fun, and there's
yeah.
something interesting about like letting everybody sort of take a swing at it rather than having some master plan, licensing plan. I mean, so I think that is very interesting to me, and it's cool to kind of unwind those things, and that's kind of what we tried to do a little bit with the book.
One other thing I'll say about Pac-Man too is, so to tie it into like the way television has changed since like the 80s, there every once in a while you see they remake some absolute piece of trash show from the 80s because they're like, well, when this was on, 80 million people watched it at the same time. And you're like, well, that's because the Dukes of Hazzard was all that was on, and we had three stations. Bringing it back is not a great idea, and it doesn't hold up over time. So you could probably make a similar argument with Pac-Man, but then you start playing it and you're like, this is just as fun and playable now as it was back then. It's like it's not my favorite game because of nostalgia. It's my favorite game because I still pick it up and enjoy playing it more than any other game. And that's something that shouldn't be lost about the game.
Right, it's a legit good game,
It
and
wasn't all marketing. It was a good
I
game.
yeah, totally. And I think the time when I do have some love for Dukes of Hazzard, so I just want to give a shout out to
Well,
the,
yeah, I think I do
you
too.
know,
I haven't watched it
Bo
in a
and
while, but
Luke.
I'm scared
I
too.
mean, that Dodge Charger, man, what a cool car. I mean,
Yeah,
let's,
maybe a new
say
paint
no,
job, but
right, say nothing of the Confederate flag on top. I mean, that is a BA car. I mean,
yeah,
that's very cool.
I
But
had as
I
much
do.
Dukes of Hazzard stuff as a kid. I had that board game. I had that cup. I had all that stuff too. But
Oh man, that car. I mean, just an epic car. But I think.
the welded doors shut. The doors that
Yep.
are welded shut. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting because it's, for me with the Pac-Man book, like when I realized that maybe someone wanted why would there be a interest in a book? I was at my kid's school and talking about like, You know, it was when my daughter was, I think, kindergarten or first grade, I think maybe, and it was like career day. You know, what does your dad do? And I said, oh, I write about video games, and I said, how many of you know who Pac-Man is? And all these like 6-year-olds raised their hand,
Wow.
and I was just like, what? Like, you can't all have parents that are my age, so what's going on? But you know, Pac-Man is this cultural force, and this idea that that game, you know, anybody can still pick it up and play it, and it's a legit fun game. Like, you know, you have to celebrate that as a pop culture artifact. Like, you know,
Yes.
Pac-Man has been through every time there's a new sort of video game technology, Pac-Man's there, right? You know, Pac-Man's been done in virtual reality and augmented reality and, you know, console, arcade, you know, like all these
Side
different
scroller,
ways.
all these different things. Yeah.
Right, you know, he's been a Google Doodle, he's been a, you know, a
Yeah.
Google Map. I mean, like all these crazy things, Pac-Man's always there because it's this classic gameplay that is durable, you know, and stands the test of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's up there with Tetris, is the closest thing you could really compare it to in terms of something that it just is that right combination, that secret sauce of it being, I don't know. It's just, but I mean, Missile Command, if I never play Missile Command again, I remember that game infuriating me as a child.
That's funny.
Defender, I could go back and play a little bit. I used to like that. Oh, before I forget, um you got something I saw on your Instagram that I am extremely envious of, and I wish I wore the shirt today that I have. Discs of Tron.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
Tron to me is like the blue lights around here. This is definitely Tron. Like Tron to me is like I love Tron. I'm ready to go down to Disney to go just on that ride. And like I when the Tron Legacy movie came out, I flew out to California Adventures just so I could go to that Tron bar and stuff.
Nice.
No one else cared but me. But do you have a similar love of Tron?
I do, and it sort of parallels some of my interest in Pac-Man in the sense that like, you know, I was a little kid when Tron came out, you know, I saw it on VHS a lot, it was on cable, you know, but I think it had sort of this
Recently
outsized
acquired.
nice, nice.
Actual dialogue, music, and sound effects. I haven't listened
Oh,
to this
see,
yet, but
I don't have that one. I'm interested to hear how that
I
sounds.
saw this at a record store recently, but it didn't have the record in it. So I'm like, I'm ordering that now. And I mean, this art is beautiful. It's
Yeah.
I remember I watched the commentary. Sorry to cut you off. The commentary in the Tron DVD, and they said if they had known how much work it would be to make this movie, they never would have made it, and they
Totally.
certainly wouldn't release it the week before ET.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's Tron's so interesting because for a movie that really didn't do that well, I mean, it sort of gained a following, you know, a cult following, but I mean, it's really had a sort of an outsized effect on pop culture because the way we think about computers, the way we sort of, you know, you think about
Yeah,
1982, you know, most people did not have a personal computer. You know, most people had never even sat down at a computer, and personal computers were a very different thing. People thought of computers as these room-sized things with vacuum tubes and
right.
reel-to-reel tape, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I think it gave sort of a voice to what does a programmer do? Well, a programmer types things in and, you know, interacts with this world and you know, and then the visual side of that where it's like, oh, you're inside a game. Maybe that's what is going on there.
Yeah,
You've got like the
we gotta fight
neon
for the
glowing
users.
lights. Right, you know, so you've got like, you know, and that even that aesthetic, that really simple polygon
Yes.
aesthetic and all the glowing lines and all this stuff, like that has stayed with our culture, you know, and it's really had a big influence, maybe almost as big as something like a Blade Runner, right? You
Yes.
know, in terms
Yeah.
of visual aesthetics. So,
Yeah.
you know, Tron is amazing. I mean, it's interesting. The movie's a lot of fun. I have a lot of love for the sequel and
Me
you know
too.
the subsequent stuff. You know, I like I played the console games. I
I
played the
loved it.
arcade
Yeah.
machine.
They put out a game on Xbox a while ago that I got years later, and I enjoyed the crap out of it. It was great.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I
Discs of
mean,
Tron, I love the console game. I love the arcade game of Tron. There's two of them. There was the discs one, and then there was the other one. They're
right.
so friggin' beautiful. Just the blue plastic just gets me. It's
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
you know, and so I'm actually working on another book, and I'm working on a couple, but one of the books that I'm working on right now is a visual history of Tron.
Shut the front
And
door.
yeah, yeah. So still talking with publishers about it, but the work is continuing. And
Get
you
that
know,
done
I
because they're talking about Tron 3 again.
right, right.
Hopefully.
No, I know.
Jared Leto, if
Um,
you're listening, get off your ass.
yeah, Jared, if you're listening and you want to write the forward, you know, like
Yeah.
let's make
Yeah.
that happen.
If he doesn't do it, feel free to call me. I'm more than happy to.
All right, you guys are tight, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay.
No, I was gonna say to write the forward. I can't get you with Jared Leto. But if you want to take a
Oh, come
huge,
on.
huge drop down, I'll be more than happy to write it forward. I can sign it as Jared Leto.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah, so I think with the Tron game, so I think the story is that, there was this really interesting synergy with the video game, Midway. So I'm in the Chicago area here, right? And Midway was located right here in my backyard. And so they were the ones responsible for bringing Pac-Man from Japan to the US and really helping make it this huge hit. But then they also licensed Tron as part of the tie-in with this movie. And the game made way more money than the movie. The game was
Yeah.
actually super successful and it's
Was
fun.
the game first or was it
At the same time, it was
okay.
coinciding to release.
Right.
So, and that's the interesting thing is it's a movie about video games, but then there's a video game that's about the movie, and then like in the subsequent movies, that game about the movie is actually a canonical game in the movie. So it's this crazy. Right, it's this crazy snake eating the snake's tail, but like that game was very successful, and George Gomez was the guy leading that team. He was one of the younger programmers at Midway, and he sort of took it on, and they pitched this game internally, and they won the pitch, and they built it, and it not only is the game really fun and challenging, it's a tough game, but that the cabinet really brings the Tron world to life, and people remember it very fondly. And so that arcade machine did really well. And so they said, hey, you know what? You want to do a follow up because there was part of the game that they weren't able to include. It's this disc battle sequence, and so they turned that into Discs of Tron, and they released it in two versions. Right? They released it in a regular stand up arcade, but then they released it in this huge environmental cabinet that you could literally step into it and stand in it, right? And the idea is you have speakers behind you, you have lights around you, and it's this immersive cabinet, right? There's even like reflective surfaces in there that sort of make it so it feels more like the screen itself looks more immersive. I mean, there's all sorts of things, and I had never played the arcade version of Tron growing up because they were a little rare. They weren't.
Yeah, I don't think I had either.
Original.
I didn't even know that I really knew that it existed until I downloaded it a few years ago looking for the other game. But
yeah. But I'd never seen one until in person. I mean, I played it, online and stuff, but I had never seen one until we brought one in for this exhibition that I helped mount at the Chicago Game Space, this video game museum. So we had a sort of a playable history of Tron in this exhibit about Tron, and a friend of mine owns an arcade, and he had an environmental disc of Tron, and they wheeled this thing in here. It's massive. It's 6'4". It's 700 pounds. It's gigantic.
700 pounds of Tron.
It's huge. It's huge. And so he brought it in, and we got to play it, and it was amazing. But it was only a handful of weeks later. I was visiting some family here in the suburbs, and long story short, I found just a couple blocks away from where my parents live. My niece told me that she's like, yeah, I saw somebody had something sitting on their curb that was Tron based, and I was
holy
like,
crap!
I was like, is that an arcade machine? And she's like, I don't know. And so I'm like, all right, we're getting in the car. So I, hopped in the car with my brother and my niece, and we pull up, and sure enough, somebody was throwing away their environmental discs of Tron arcade machine sitting there. It had been sitting there for a couple days because the garbage man had come by and they had stuck a note on it saying, we will not take this because you have to break it down.
It got rejected as garbage. That is, and you were there to save it.
So I did. So I went, the car's not even stopping. I'm jumping out of the car and I'm ringing the doorbell and I'm like, hey, are you getting rid of this? And she's like, yeah, I don't think it works. I don't want it anymore. And I'm like, well, okay. I'm like, can I take this? She's like, sure. So I, got some furniture dollies and ratchet straps, and we put this thing on wheels, and we wheeled it down the street and, blocks away, wheeled it back into my parents' garage. And I am now the proud owner of a environmental disc of Tron machine. It's my first arcade machine.
And it works. It works all.
We were able to get it working. I had major help because my friend, owns 300 machines. He knows how to do it. So we got it working, and it's awesome, and it's in incredible condition, and we get to play it now.
I got an electric organ a couple years ago too, in a very similar way. And if it was an inch bigger, and if there wasn't a random 18-year-old kid there to help me, I wouldn't have gotten it. But like, it's amazing, and I have it. But the idea that that nobody would take a Tron machine for a few days is kind of insane. Because even someone think they might be able to flip it or something. But like the fact that like you came across it, is there That must have been wild. That must
I
have been
I
a weird
could
day.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's sort of like, hey Tim, pick any arcade machine that you'd ever want to own.
Right. For
It
me,
would be either
it's
this
Tron.
one
Yeah.
or yeah, this one or the Star Wars cabinet, the cockpit one.
Yes. Yes. That's
And
so true.
so sure enough, my dream machine is sitting on this, the side of this in a quiet little suburb,
Wow.
there for
That's got to
me,
go in the book somewhere. Like
Oh, it was
the
amazing. I mean, and
yeah.
word got out because a friend of mine runs a pretty popular arcade machine blog, and I talked to him about it, and he wrote a story. And suddenly, a week later, I was getting interviewed by the Washington Post about it. So, it's now all over the place. It was kind of funny.
Were the
Uh, you
original
know,
owners, what was their like attitude towards it? Were they just like, yeah, I don't know
they,
what a Tron is? Like,
you know what? They just didn't want it anymore, and they thought it wasn't working, and she really didn't want to talk about it any more than that. So I don't.
all
It has
right.
some sort of backstory that I just don't know, but.
It's haunted.
Uh,
It's Tronted.
well, somebody said this, in one of these articles. They said one man's trash is another man's Tron. I
Exactly.
mean, so
That's actually kind of applies to like the way Tron has sort of been treated. Like you think of like The Simpsons, where like
yeah,
anybody seen Tron? No, 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 no,
nope,
no,
nope.
no. Yeah,
Oh wait, yes. Oh, nope.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
Wow, man. Yeah, if I show up at your door playing welcome for that Tron game one day, I promise I'll call first.
Bring
For
some
some,
quarters.
yeah, this sort of made me think of something. This has come up in a couple other episodes, but there was another thing around that same period that had a very big influence on me. Do you remember a movie called Cloak and Dagger?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. With
Yeah, Dabney
Dabney
Coleman
Coleman,
and the
right?
kid from ET,
Mm-hmm.
Henry Thomas. That
Right.
was another movie that I was based on a video game, a surprisingly violent children's movie.
Yeah. It's
Um,
pretty dark actually.
yeah, and it was funny. The little girl that got in it, they definitely were like, "Get us a Drew Barrymore type," because they probably couldn't get Drew, but they definitely got little Drew for that one. But
Yeah.
that was another. Do you know anything about that video game? Because I tried to. I guess that was a game, but I don't know if it was ever released or anything. I tried to
I,
find information about it, but I couldn't.
I
They showed it
remember.
in the movie.
Yeah, I remember coming across. I don't know that it was complete, but I know it wasn't. I wasn't ever released. I don't think the movie did very well. But I mean, there's Atari product all over that movie. I mean, it's like heavy duty Atari product placement. But yeah, beyond that, I'm not sure what the rest of the story is.
It was a weird error because it's like you have essentially that movie was in some ways an advertisement for Atari, but it was also a pretty, kind of scary movie. There was also a time when we were making RoboCop and Terminator games for kids, and like I remember we had those for the Nintendo, and those were all over the arcade. It was just, I don't know. We all turned
Well,
out fine, I think.
and it's so interesting. I mean, I say this to my kids a lot, now, my kids are, not too different age, 8 and 11, and they have all these programs and all these things that are very narrowly aimed right at their ages, right? They're any age you have, there's something that's appropriate for their ages. But, there was a lack of that kind of stuff.
Right.
There was stuff that was aimed at kids generally, but then you gotta wonder, like, what are they trying to do? Like, all the Rambo movies. There was a Rambo cartoon. There was
Yes.
a RoboCop cartoon. These
Yes.
are cartoons based off of hard R-rated films,
Right. Even like
and
that Nintendo cartoon, I believe had characters from Narc in it, a game about like busting drug. You're just like, and I know they had to
right.
use whatever IP they had from Acclaim or whatever, but like still,
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like some of that, I think some of it is just people didn't really take it. I don't know if they wouldn't take it seriously because I mean, there's creative people making those decisions, but in some ways, people didn't really worry about that. Like,
right,
did they worry? Hey, you know what? You have the RoboCop action figure and watch the RoboCop cartoon. Are you going to go and watch the super violent? You going to seek out RoboCop? I mean,
right.
you don't want this to be a catch-all, but you say like, you know what? It's just a different time
Well, the definition of what was appropriate for children has changed over time too. And the other thing too
for
about a
sure.
RoboCop is back then, if you watch RoboCop, it wasn't like your dad had a RoboCop gun somewhere in the house. These days, you watch RoboCop, your dad may have a RoboCop gun somewhere. So it was like the level of fantasy
Yeah.
was like so much more removed than it kind of is now.
Right. Well, and it's a satire, right? I mean, it's all about the evils of big corporations and violence. I mean that now is some of that lost on people?
Right.
People. I mean, these are the same people who sing along to,
Rage,
"Born in the USA" and Bruce Springsteen.
right.
You're like, you know what? This is like a super negative,
Right.
song. This
Or
isn't
ultra
a
conservative people who love Rage Against the Machine, or half the people who love Fight Club.
read the lyrics, people. Read the
I know. Read the
lyrics.
lyrics. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so I want to get back to Art of Atari for a second, though I did notice something here. Sky Captain and the Art of Tomorrow. We talked a little bit about how did this get made earlier. This was a how did this get made movie. This movie was wild. What did you do related to that?
So I was one of the editors on the book that's called Kevin Conran's Sky Captain and the Art of Tomorrow. So Kevin was the art director on that movie. His brother Kerry Conran was the director, and they basically started as making this movie on their computers, and they said, you know what, we're going to make a film that's grandiose and big in scale and totally wild, and we're going to do it with on green screen. Like that was not done. That had
It
never
was a
been done
really
in that
quick
that
shoot,
way.
wasn't it? Too, I think. I think they had to shoot it.
It started out that way, but then they actually like sold it in, and they were actually able to make this pretty good sized budget movie with big stars attached to it who really
Yeah,
liked the idea of doing something different. So you got Jude Law and Angelina Jolie, but Kevin
Gwyneth Paltrow,
Conran,
who
yeah,
takes a
yeah,
punch to the face at some point. I think from one of the.
yeah. So Kevin Conran was the art director, and he basically, since it was his film with his brother, he ended up designing every set, every
Wow.
prop, all the costumes. Super creative guy, amazing artist,
Very
and
innovative looking movie too.
yeah,
It's a movie unlike most you've ever seen in your life, but it has a look so particular to itself that I'm sure influenced a lot of people.
yeah, totally. So Kevin and I had connected a couple years ago because I was interviewing for another book that I'm also working on. Because and it's another story. It's this retro futuristic illustrator named Arthur Radabaugh, who had like a Sunday newspaper strip, color comic strip about like what the future was going to be like in the like 60 in the 70s, like early
Wow.
70s, late
This
60s.
dude, I'm already fascinated. I'm already all in on this
Yeah,
guy.
and I mean, super interesting. Google him. Really unsung illustrator. But Kevin and I had him in common because I could clearly see in Sky Captain that there was some influence there. So Kevin and I, connected, and we've been working on some other projects. But I came in, and he said, I'm doing this book about my experiences, sort of basically designing the world of Sky Captain. So we did that, and I was able to jump in and help a little bit on the editing for that book. So I love that movie, and I'm just totally amazed. I mean, Kevin is continuing to work into Hollywood. He does all kinds of cool stuff. He's directing an animated feature right now, so he's still very much in that world.
Oh yeah. That's a
So
movie that like it's one that's going to get you more work if you make a movie like that because people are like, wow, if he did that with what he had there, what can he do if we give him this? And it's like you just know you're investing in somebody who's a real artist.
yeah, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And speaking of real art, the Art of Atari book, which I've seen on the shelves a lot. I feel like I own this, but I couldn't find it around my house. But I definitely gave it a good read somewhere. And now I'm gonna try to track it down. I grew up on Atari, as you talked about before. There was obviously a big difference between what you saw in the box and what you saw in the game, but it didn't really bother me. Like for me, box art's huge. It's like I don't think you can judge a book by its cover, but you can judge an album by its cover, and it's fun to try to judge a game by its cover. But we're looking at these. A lot of the art of these sort of feels almost Alex Ross-esque. Like it's almost like this super real what was the mentality behind that? Why, these days everything would be super cartoony, I think, especially if you're going to appeal to kids. Like who were they going for with this?
Well, I mean, you got to put it in its context, right? So specifically with the 2600, right? Because that's where they really had the most of this painted artwork. But the idea, was
The only
that
video game system with wood paneling that I'm aware of.
that's right. Right. Well, I mean, like, so no one had really marketed, cartridges, right? Video game cartridges in a stored environment. How do you do that? So George Opperman, who was the art director of Atari and really was one of the brains behind this, they sort of said, okay, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to market and sell these things? Well, we need packaging. Let's pull from things like album covers and movie posters and paperback novels, and let's create some engagement, some emotion, and sort of how do you communicate? Video games are still kind of new, right? It's like it's a tennis game, it's a basketball game, it's a tank game. Well, you can show, the pixel art of that, but that's like a literal thing where they're trying to create some connection and some emotion to something that you already know about, right? So you know baseball, you know tennis, you know what a tank looks like, and the idea is they were trying to capture some of the excitement of it. So they have illustrators who are classic trained illustrators who are hand illustrating, and they come from colleges, they come from sort of uh, advertising where George Opperman came from. They're borrowing from editorial, when illustration is really being used as a tool to sell things, and they're doing that. So they're putting all that stuff together, and that's where you get the 2600 artwork. And they're not trying to say, oh, we're trying to get you to think that the video game looks like that. I mean, that's like a 21st century read back into the 20th century, where this was very much like you didn't expect these things to be exactly the same. The idea is that you're conjuring this idea and this image before you ever sit down and plug the cartridge in.
They're
But what
very
it also
dramatic.
yeah, and what it also did though is it also like filled in some of the gaps. These are really simple games, but providing this just iota of storytelling then made you say, okay, Breakout is not just about rainbow bricks and a rectangle. It's about an astronaut in space or a guy with a racket, and it sort of gave you this connection, from the
Right.
gameplay world to the world of your imagination, and it really sort of filled in some of the story gaps in your mind.
That's a great point because I think so. You have the box art, which is the very dramatic, very well trained artist doing them. Then you have the game, which is very pixelated boxes. And I sort of, as you're saying that, I remember that when I used to play those games, I feel like my mind would meld the two. Because especially when I'm thinking about adventure, like adventure is a really hokey little box moving a key around game. But I remember the dramatic art completely. I remember the first time I saw it, that was my white whale of the game that I could never find anywhere because they just didn't. It was the Snake Eyes essentially. I couldn't find it anywhere, like Snake
Yeah.
Eyes figure. And then, but once I got it, my brain did a lot of combining those images together. And Haunted House is another one like that for me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, when it shows you the power, Hitchcock used to say, hey, the scariest thing is the power of your imagination. It's what you
Right.
don't show, right? And
Yep.
you think about Haunted House. I used to play it as a kid and it totally freaked me out.
Yeah.
And it's not just because the actual game itself is super scary, but it's the combination of like you're in this dark room, you turn off the lights, you have this
Right.
box art that's super creepy, and all of that stuff mixed together in your brain ends up becoming an experience that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think that there's a compare like that there's like a comparison you make the modern gaming there? I'm not a big modern gamer. If I play anything, it's usually older games. But do you think that that's something that's still a major concern now?
I think it's just a different approach. People want to see their known IP. They want to see something that kind of looks like the game because they feel like, oh, if you don't, why are you doing that, right? Then that begs another question. Now, that being said, I've been working with the people at Modern Atari to do to art direct some of the artwork for some of their new game releases, right? And so I came on board and saying, hey guys, you know what? Atari has an opportunity. There's a precedent for creating game artwork that's different than the actual. I mean, they can make these games look beautiful and amazing, and that's great, in game. But why not pique people's interest and do something that sort of, is a nod to history and say,
Right.
make the game art look different and let people bring something else to it. And so
Agreed.
that's what we've done, and that's been really fun. And I think people respond to that. I don't think you have to be an Atari fan. I think it sort of opens your mind to be like, you know what? We're not just going to render a scene right out of the game and put it on the front of the box. You can do that, but like maybe there's an opportunity for a little more creativity and say, okay, we're going to come to this great artist and say, how would you do this in your style? How would you do this in a way that is moody and atmospheric and, it sort of captures some kind of interesting emotion, and then you can still have the bonus of going in and playing the game. So I don't know that every video game company can get away with that, but I think audiences are also more sophisticated than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea of doing that, of sort of having that little bit of like pleasant dissonance between, what does the key art look like and what does the actual game look like, I think that can be fun. I think that it's a great place to play.
It's funny too because there's a lot that gets said about what Atari did wrong, but there's so much that Atari did right.
Yeah.
And that they really created something that like even the logo has endeared to this day and it means something. It's perfect. and the trying to capitalize on that branding. I think there's a lot of people who probably felt a little bruised by Atari's downfall, but like that branding is still gold, and it's like those
Yeah.
games are still super playable. It's time
Yeah.
has come again.
Well, I mean, that's why I wanted. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to write Art of Atari is because I come from a logo design world, right? So like I've designed dozens of logos for companies and organizations, and there's sort of this Mount Rushmore of logos, like the famous logos that people know, the Apple logo and the Polaroid logo and the Nike swoosh, all these different brands that are sort of like super famous because of what they've meant to the culture and what they've obviously meant to their companies. But Atari's right up there, and I realized that like as a designer, I had no idea who did that, and so I started looking into it and realized that George Opperman, the guy who really sort of was one of the foundational bedrocks of the visual history of Atari, was the one who designed the logo, and that sort of led me down this path to writing that book.
Wow. So were these did these artists back then, did they get a cut of these games, or was it more of a markup situation? Yeah, like more of a comic book thing where it's like you
It's
drew it
work
and
for
we own it.
hire.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
work for hire thing, that did not, that screwed a lot of artists out of a lot of money,
Well,
unfortunately.
and it was just the expectation, though. If you're, I mean, like you think about it, even today, I mean, like a lot of these illustrators, not all of them, but a lot of them were, Atari employees, so they were full-time artists, and I mean that's pretty unusual to have a steady corporate gig as a full-time illustrator. I mean,
Right.
especially now,
There aren't a whole
but
lot of companies that hire them. Disney, Marvel, it's not a
well,
lot.
but even Marvel, like
Well,
those
I'm
are
thinking
all
more of the
different.
Marvel movies. I think now they
Oh
actually
yeah,
have like, yeah, digital
yeah,
artists.
but
Yeah.
I mean, it's so many contract people. So the idea that you could either try your luck at being a freelancer or you could have this steady, gig,
Right.
and sure, some of them ended up doing other things later on, especially when Atari sort of, was going downhill. But, I think, yeah, there just wasn't an expectation that you were going to get that. Now, even the programmers themselves had to fight for a cut of that, what made them successful, and eventually that did happen. Um,
So did you grow up in Chicago as well?
yeah.
So when you were a kid, did having Midway sort of in your backyard, did that mean anything to you? Because I realized that like a lot Atari is, I think, based in the Boston area, and a lot of video game stuff was, but I that didn't register to me as a kid.
Yeah, so Atari was in California. Now they did have
Okay.
other people working in the Boston area who worked on some of the later consoles and things like that. But you know what? Growing up here, because video games were not the same kind of cultural cachet, like we didn't know. I mean, when I was a kid, when during the NES era, I think we started cluing into the fact that there were, video game companies in the Chicago area. And Chicago is really interesting because it's one of the birthplaces of pinball. I mean, it was the
Yes.
epicenter of pinball and jukeboxes for many, many, many years. And that's part of why we had all these video game companies. You had the Midways, you had Williams, you had Bally, all in the Chicago area because they had access to, making chips, to the manufacturing, to the supply chain, to the building cabinets, all that stuff kind of came out of there. But yeah, Chicago's still a little bit of a sort of unknown as this hub for video games. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to write, Pac-Man Birth of an Icon. That's why I'm excited to do more with the history of Tron, hopefully a book because it's the history of video games and pop culture, but it's also the history of my hometown.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, Chicago is a very 80s city with like the John Hughes to it as well. It's like
For sure.
it's there's a lot of stories there from the 80s that kind of originate in that area. And I
Yeah.
don't know, felt like a million miles away when I was a kid. But
Well, we made some upgrades since then. Chicago's a
yeah.
great, it's a little safer. There's some fun stuff. I still, always love, my city, and I still consider it's a world-class city. But it's just cool to see things like video games and pop culture still coming out of it. I mean, we've got a great indie game scene here. I mean, awesome barcades and things like that, and that, if you know where to look, the history is still hanging around.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, one thing I mentioned before, that this book kept popping up in all of my ads, and it was popping up on Facebook. And there was one comment in particular that was pinned by somebody that got pinned, that I kept seeing, that talked about how one thing they wish there was a little more of in the book, and forever, this book was 10,000 pages, I'd read all of it, was that they wish that there was a little more about the bootleg stuff. Now, I, as somebody who has gotten a cease and desist from Namco over this shirt, Tupac forever. I thought this was brilliant. Whatever. But like, I don't know. I'm not gonna fight it. This is a long time ago. But I do know that they are hardcore about their IP compared to other
Yeah,
companies.
yeah, they really. I mean that. I think so much of the value of Pac-Man, besides the game, is still the IP. So they are pretty serious about protecting it. You know, so I mean that's part of the reason why we didn't include that. I mean we had to fight pretty hard. Even there, we have a whole chapter, extensive time devoted to the making of Miss Pac-Man, and we really had to thread the needle to tell that story. But I was really excited about talking about how that came to be. I mean it's just one of those unusual stories. And some of the reason is, and you can read some of this in the book,
Yeah, I don't
but
want to give
also
it
you can
away.
read
It is a
about it
great
online.
story.
Miss Pac-Man has a complicated legal history, mostly because it was such a weird journey to it
Yeah.
becoming a game. But I think that's a lot of it. Miss Pac-Man is just, this multi-parentage of Miss Pac-Man. But it's also one of those cool things that would have never happened today.
Right. And I will say, if I go back and play Pac-Man, I'm probably more of a Ms. Pac-Man man than a
Hmm.
Pac-Man. Because like there is something about they did the slight tweaks, I don't know, it worked out. I would say that I probably see more Ms. Pac-Man games in the wild than I do see regular Pac-Man games, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them, and I think, I mean, Miss Pac-Man even outsold Pac-Man for a good chunk of time there. And I think that's an interesting thing. Like, in Japan, where Pac-Man originated, it was a moderate hit, but here it just kept going, and then Midway seeing that, they said, hey, you know what? There's an opportunity for us to, kind of double down. And, that led to Miss Pac-Man, but then also Junior Pac-Man and,
Yeah.
the Pac-Man, the pinball machine. I mean, there's so many sequels that they did and some other planned ones because it was just a cultural juggernaut in some ways, and they were going to
That's what
ride that as long as they could.
led to this high quality
Nice,
game by
nice.
Midway Valley that I've had forever. This, yeah, I mean, Pac-Man was on everything. These games, like I remember this, I got a lot of mileage out of this in the back of my parents' VW microbus.
For sure.
Yeah,
Well, and it's like Pac-Man like, right? I
right.
think that's now the expectation is, I mean, you can buy a Pac-Man version that's this tall and the screen's about, the size, half the size of a credit card.
Right,
But back then it's like, okay, is this mildly amusing? Yes. Is it Pac-Man? I like Pac-Man, sure.
right. Is it less frustrating than Cubert? Yes. A game that I love, but diagonal was not a direction that Atari did well back in the day. Like,
Well, actually, if you look in the instructions for that game, they instruct you to turn your joystick so that it's diamond shaped, so then it's easier for you to do. You
sweet
know,
Jesus, how did I? You know what's funny is
But-
I still have the instruction manual to Cubert. I just found all my old Atari manuals and my Atari Force comics and all that stuff. If I go down there and see that, I'm probably gonna break something. That's
but you've just
that's
been playing it
genius.
wrong the whole time. Is that it?
Yeah, my brain is broken now. I love Cubert. I want to love Cubert. Cubert to me was like the Pac-Man that never was. It was like we're gonna get another bite at this apple, and they kind of
Yeah,
got like halfway to the moon on that one because it is endearing, but it's not. It's not that. It's Gonzo to Kermit, I would say. You
for
know.
sure. But I mean, but popular enough that it got a sequel.
Yep.
It got multiple cartridge versions. I mean, actually Chicago Game Space, the museum that I've done multiple exhibits with now. We did the 40 years of Pac-Man and the Tron exhibit. They're doing an exhibit on Qbert, and they've got Warren Davis and the other creators coming in for the opening of that exhibit. It's gonna be pretty soon here. It's this fall sometime.
I got to make it
Uh,
out to that at some point. I haven't been to
yeah.
Chicago in years. I'm doing this thing where I get I get a tattoo of a leaf every time I visit a new city, new state, and I just got five. I just got back from I went to Alabama and Tennessee and Georgia, and then I had to get other ones for a couple other states I'd been to, and so I got to go to Chicago again. And now I feel like I have an excuse to come to these museums because it sounds just awesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What are the best places to visit out there? Like if someone's going to come out on sort of a little gaming weekend, what are the places you don't want to miss?
Well, I mean, so Chicago Game Space is a great, this playable, it's small but playable museum. Logan Arcade is one of the great barcades. Just great, great games, good drinks. And then I think you gotta visit if you're coming here, right in the suburbs, is a place called Galloping Ghost Arcade, and I believe that they have the most arcade machines on the floor of any arcade in North America. I think it's more than 600 games at this point. And you pay $20 or whatever it is to get in, and you can everything's set on free play. And you can, I mean, it's almost overwhelming how many games there are to play. So that's a bucket list item. You know, over and above all the outside great things to do, you've got Lake Michigan, which is awesome. We have the Chicago River. If you're here, you really need to go on the architectural boat tour, which goes up and down the river. And it's one of the coolest ways to see just an amazing city.
Is
If you
that the
care
river
about.
from The Fugitive where they say if they can dye it green one day a year, why can't they dye
Yes,
it blue the rest? I think of that like I don't know
yes.
why that pops in my head like once a month at least.
Yeah, no, that's a great. I think the director of that movie was also a Chicago area guy, so there's a lot of love for Chicago in that
I
movie.
had my brother went to Northwestern, so I'd been out there a bunch back in the, but that was obviously a long time ago.
Nice. Yeah.
Um, what to you? I was just trying to think about what some of my most frustrating games were back in the day. Ghosts and Goblins is a game that I should not even be legal. That and Dragon's Lair can both. There should be a certain segment of hell for those two games. Are there any in particular that you think of that like, and are there any that you pick up now and go, okay, now that I'm an adult, I can conquer this? Because there is something too when I go back, and some games seem super easy, and some games I'm like, how do they ever do this?
I feel like things like we played the heck out of Contra, when I was a
Yeah.
kid,
I saw a
like on.
Contra board game the other day when I was like at a store and I didn't even pick it up. I'm like, what is that like? You just throwing dice at each other?
I don't know. I love that game, but I'm like, I remember this being easier than it is.
Yeah,
And it's like that. Maybe I just don't have the same skills that I had when I was 11 or 13 or whatever. But I like that game. What else? What else doesn't hold up? I don't know. I tend to be pretty positive about it. I mean, I feel like the Turtles games still
oh,
hold up
so many
really
good Turtles
well.
games.
I
Yeah,
mean, but also like I appreciate at this point playing games that I don't have to learn a new language or like get into this gigantic backstory. I mean,
yeah,
so I'm still down with asteroids and missile. I think I have an
sure.
appreciation for Missile Command with a trackball that I don't know if I had when I was a kid.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so, but
yeah.
yeah.
So with your, this is something I used to do with my brother and I used to do with my Atari 2600 as a kid. Is that we kind of got bored with the game. We found that if you took the on-off switch and sort of put it in the middle, it would sort of scramble some games and you could play them. Was that something else? Was that something you used to do, or was other people
Uh,
aware of this?
I did it some. I mean, I think they call it frying the cartridge.
Oh,
I think that's the term, but I think it can hurt your cartridge. But
oh,
we used to do that sometimes, and you'd get like an unintentional effect.
that's how
Um,
hard up for entertainment we were. Like I remember doing it a lot with the Spider-Man game, the one where you climb up
oh heck
the
yeah,
building. That was the best one to do it with. You know,
that's funny. I loved that game.
yeah,
Again, you're like, okay, it's barely Spider-Man, but you know what? That's what we had. It's just we had that, and we had the Nicholas Hammond 1978 Spider-Man TV show. We had the
yes,
Lou Ferrigno Hulk, and
yeah,
we liked it.
yeah. We
Because that's
loved
what
it.
we had.
Yeah, we had the greatest American hero. He had to be our Superman. When they made that Flash TV show in the early 90s, I was like, get out the VCR tapes. Like, this is gonna be it. I loved that show. It's
Oh,
just,
I think it was good. I
yeah,
showed that to my kids just like not even 2 years ago, and they were all in. They're like, "Why isn't there more of this?" They
yeah.
were like, "There's 6 or 7 or 8 seasons of that new Flash show. Why is there only one season of this?"
Yeah. Well, they brought
You
him
know?
back. He's like
Yep.
yeah, which is great. I mean, it's like I love how DC has really, celebrated their past. Like, the Flash is my favorite character. It's probably no coincidence. My very first action figure ever was a Flash superpower figure that I still have.
Oh, from the Superpowers lines. Those were great, great
Yeah,
toys.
they're
Loved
beautiful. And
those. The
you know,
Firestorm one. I mean, I'm a Firestorm fan, so
yes,
like, I mean that kind of nailed it for me. I mean, that's like the late '70s, early '80s characters where you're like, this character is such a product of its era, But
yeah.
it's just awesome.
Firestorm was the one that I always wanted, never got, because I know I bought a Funko Pop of him recently because I wanted to like I was like it's that imagery of it, that, and I finally got, they redid a Hobgoblin figure that I always wanted
Oh
from
yeah.
back in the day, and like he doesn't get enough merchandise, but you know, I don't know.
Totally.
I got a question for you as a fellow Tim. This is something that's been coming up recently amongst my friends. Um, would you ever consider going by Moth because it's in the middle of Timothy? Because we started this as a joke, but now people at work are calling me Moth, and
That's
I
hilarious.
kind of hated it, but it's kind of grown on me. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think you could do worse. But I think you gotta kind of you probably have to start by going by Timothy first, and then
That's what I do. I do go by
Oh,
Timothy
okay.
most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yes. See, I don't. The only person who calls me Timothy is my mom when she's mad at me. So, so I'm Tim for the duration. So I had to fight to earn that one. So I think I'll stick with it. But I think Moth's not bad. I think you could do a lot worse.
I think it gets better the more you say it, and because I think Timmy to me is rough. Like I hate when people call me Timmy because like I'm not never been a Jim, but I feel like Timmy is worse than Jimmy. I don't know. There's something about the I sound of Tim that's always I don't know. Maybe I'm
Well,
too
you're either
psycho.
Tiny Tim or you're Timmy.
Yes, I know. You
You
get
know,
it's like there isn't. What do we got? Like Tim Allen. Like we're not very well represented in popular culture, so there's lots of
that's
room
fine.
for us.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so I'd lean into the Moth. Go for it.
Yeah, I think Moth Johnson, and it's especially Moth
So,
Johnson sounds
you
like
sound like a
somebody from the
wrestler from a
70s.
Spider-Man cartoon.
Yeah,
And now Spider-Man's gonna fight Moth
Moth
Johnson.
Johnson. Yeah, and I'm definitely not going to win. I'm the Glass Joe of that league.
Yeah,
So
100%. But still, you can look scared. He's the guy that Spider-Man picks up and throws him around.
yeah, I was watching something the other day. It's the new Twisted Metal show, and the dude there who played Sandman, who was Lowell from Wings, he looks he might as well have been auditioning to play Tombstone from Spider-Man. He's not going to play it because like he was Sandman, but I was like, dude is Tombstone right here, and I was all for it. I've never played Twisted Metal, but it was a pretty enjoyable the first few episodes that I watched with
That's awesome.
Samoa Joe and all that stuff. So anything, I mean, this book is amazing. This will definitely be one that I revisit many times over the years. It's this is one that will sit on my coffee table for a long time. Even like a picture like this, like I stared at this. Maybe it's my little spectrum mind, but I stared at this for a long time. So it's an amazing book. I recommend everybody go out and pick it up.
Thanks.
I don't have my glasses on, but what was your co-writer's name?
Aryan Terpstra.
Aryan Terpstra. Pac-Man, Birth of an Icon, available all over my Facebook feed and all over places. Like I said, there's a deluxe version with a record of Pac-Man Fever. Correct?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, in yellow vinyl.
Yes. That's super cool. There's a little sliding case that goes in, and I kind of wish I'd gotten that one, but hey, I'll have this forever. So anything else you want to talk about while you're here?
No, I think that's it, man. Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope that Tron book comes to happen. I'll definitely be pre-ordering that as soon as it is. And yeah, man, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, Moth, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. All right, bye.
Some motherfucking dub in there. You feel me? You riding today. You riding this? We got soul. We got pills. We got honest. What up? Yeah, we got everything we need, man. Now, I'm not just saying my license, but it's just saying professional. You feel me? Come on, let's go to some nice sunny days. Hey, you know summer's coming when folks start getting shot and smoked on city blocks for low with any guap. Same shit, yeah, my first full gray hair. One more felony, I might have my first full gray beard. It's way weird. Feel like that was only yesterday. I'ma slowly blow like parolees, the homies guesstimate. When I blow, don't blow me like you know me, no hit the exit stage. Left of the tackle spray, redirecting your steps this way. It feels shit progressing, got the steel with the vested. Even in the summertime, I will Smith and Wesson. You cutting from the grassy, so underground Nardwar wouldn't know what the fuck to ask me. I stick it in the stomach, now let me hit the throat. She call me Mr. Drummond, so many different strokes. Your punchlines, Mr. Drummond. Audience, Mr. Jokes. To your family, return from visit folks.
Some loving, some loving. That's just some loving. Some loving, some loving. That's just some loving.
Meet Ann with wings clips, quick to flip manuscripts. Cause her man went from damaged kid to damn, he's rich, but she still can't stand the way he manages to never put nickels in the can for the cancer kids. Plus he cheats at cornhole and brags that he won, so she lost interest like porno after she comes. My DM started jingling, baby, as it was done. 2 seconds later, I can hear the snapping of her gums. She calls me half Dodge Challenger, half Lip Gallagher. I'm happy that I luckily sat next to her in algebra. I tried to hold her down, but I just couldn't balance her between the million meetings that I keep in my calendar. Plus odds aren't too sloppy that I know why my cell is blowing up, probably, but I should check just as well. Call the cops, see if I can get a hold and tell if that's copyright's yell raising hell inside the holding cell.
Some loving, some loving. That's just some loving. Some loving, that's just some loving.
Yeah, I can smell the smoke from the cookout. The bushes in the parks with the lookout. Fresh Prince, summertime on the radio. Throwback Friday, yo, the ladies know. Then I'm a smooth type guy. Listen, I'm the shit I need 2-time ply. Part of my soul on my head sky high. The weed smoke covered my body, so I try. Put a scent on like sunblock. Summertime's body season, so keep your gun cocked. I count beers in the cooler, cause when the fun stops, that's when the arguments happen. In the gunshots, it's summertime. Backyards where we play cards. Spitting in cipher, the homie trade bars. Dominoes slam on the table, we take charge. I got a style you